Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on one of the most agonizing and just universal experiences in human relationships. We're exploring the uncomfortable psychological truth behind the non-apology.
We all know that person. I mean, we really do. It could be a partner, a boss, maybe a family member. They've clearly crossed a line, they've seen the damage, they've watched the fallout, and yet there's just silence. They won't offer the two simplest words that could fix it. I'm sorry.
And when that happens, our immediate gut reaction is to label them, right? We think arrogant, selfish, or maybe even a full-blown narcissist who just enjoys the power trip. We assume they're being stubborn.
Or that they just don't care enough.
Exactly. But what we found, digging through the source material for this deep dive, well, it reveals something much more complex, and frankly, a little darker than simple arrogance.
The research suggests their refusal isn't some careless oversight. It's not just a slip-up or, a bad call. It is a highly rigid psychological defense mechanism. For these individuals, apologizing feels like an existential threat.
An identity threat.
An identity threat, yes. One they see as far more dangerous than, watching the entire relationship just fall apart.
So our mission today is to get past that surface-level judgment. We need to really unpack the architecture of this defense to figure out precisely why, in certain minds, admitting you're wrong feels like a total collapse.
To start, let's unpack that core psychological insight. Because to understand why they withhold those words, you have to see that an apology it's so much more than just a social courtesy.
Right. I mean, we use them socially to smooth things over, to say, my bad, let's move on.
Of course. But psychologically, according to the literature, the act of apologizing is fundamentally an admission of vulnerability. You're making yourself emotionally exposed. You are, for a moment, giving up power.
And that's the word.
That is the absolute key. For the person who struggles with this, with chronic non-apologies, vulnerability is it's unbearable.
Yeah.
They have built their entire self-concept around avoiding that feeling of exposure, of weakness. In their internal world, vulnerability feels like a kind of psychological death.
So what does that actually mean in practical terms? How does saying I'm sorry translate internally to I am dying?
It connects directly to the psychology of power and control. For an individual whose self-worth is, fundamentally shaky, admitting a mistake doesn't register as an act of repair.
No.
Instead, it triggers this deep, immediate threat of loss. Loss of authority, loss of superiority, and most critically, a total loss of control.
So they see it as a zero-sum game. If I apologize, I shrink. I become the lesser person in the room, and I've just handed you all the leverage.
Precisely. The unconscious belief that's running the show is, if I admit fault, I become weak, and being weak is not safe. Their whole self-image is rigidly tied to this idea of being perpetually right, perpetually strong. Any contradiction to that just has to be destroyed instantly.
Okay, but most people can admit they messed up, forgetting an anniversary or denting the car. We can feel bad without feeling like our world is ending. So why is one small error so catastrophic for them?
That brings us to the distinction between guilt and what's called toxic shame. And the sources really highlight this as the most crucial mechanism to understand here. It is the most important distinction for you to grasp. A mentally healthy person, when they make a mistake, feels guilt. Guilt is specific, it focuses on the action. Guilt says, I did a bad thing.
It's about the did.
It's about the did. So you can apologize for it, you can correct the behavior, and you can move on. The person and the action are separate.
So with the dented car, I can say, I feel bad because I dented the car. That's specific, it's manageable.
That's right. But the non-apologizer's internal process is totally different. They don't experience that healthy guilt. They experience toxic shame. And toxic shame is global. It attaches directly to their identity. Toxic shame says, I am bad.
Not, I did something bad, but I am bad.
I am the mistake. The error isn't just an event. It becomes a statement about their entire value as a human being.
Wow. So their self-esteem is that fragile, like a house of cards.
A literal house of cards. If they admit to one minor flaw, forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning, they genuinely feel like their entire identity is about to collapse under the weight of, I am fundamentally inferior. So an apology isn't about an error, it becomes a self-condemnation.
So when you're just asking for some accountability, their internal alarm is blaring. It's screaming that their very existence is under attack. That's a huge mismatch in perception.
It is. And this extreme fragility, it's not born overnight. The research often traces this defense back to their early conditioning. Many non-apologizers grew up in these hypercritical environments. Places where mistakes weren't for learning, they were catastrophic events.
We're talking about childhoods where vulnerability was used against them, maybe, or where love was conditional. If you messed up, you weren't just corrected.
You were humiliated.
Humiliated, or maybe you risked abandonment.
Absolutely. The child learns a fundamental survival rule. Never, under any circumstances, admit you're wrong. It is not safe. And that rule, now it's unconscious, and it's governing their adult relationships.
Which brings us to the actual visible defense mechanisms. Because if admitting fault would trigger that ego collapse, the brain has to find a substitute.
It has to. It employs these very specific defenses to rewrite reality, to protect that core, flawed self-image. This is why arguing with them can feel like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
Because you're not debating facts anymore.
No, you're not. You're watching an identity fight for its life. The ego has to prevent them from confronting the truth that they are, in fact, imperfect.
Let's list the most common ones that the sources detail, the tools that, replace the missing. I'm sorry.
Well, the first is just straightforward denial. That didn't happen. Or it wasn't as bad as you're remembering it.
Then we have the classic attempts to reframe the victim, which is you. Rationalization. I only spoke to you that way because I was so stressed out. And that's followed by minimization. It wasn't a big deal. You're making a mountain out of a molehill.
And of course, the most destructive tool in the arsenal, projection. You're the real problem here. I wouldn't have even reacted if you hadn't provoked me with your tone. The blame is pushed out, the pain is put onto you, and the non-apologizer remains pure.
But this leads to the mechanism that I think people find the most maddening, the narrative rewrite. We often think they're just malicious liars, that they're intentionally trying to gaslight us. But is it possible they're actually gaslighting themselves first?
That is precisely what the sources suggest. And it is so critical for you to understand this. This is cognitive dissonance in overdrive. That's the intense psychological stress you feel when you hold two conflicting beliefs.
In this case, I am a good person and I just did a hurtful, flawed thing.
Exactly. And that dissonance is excruciating. So the brain unconsciously steps in. It decides that it's safer to change reality than it is to change the self-image. So to maintain that rigid illusion of perfection, their brain subtly, quickly, and unconsciously alters their perception and their memory of what happened.
So, by the time you're sitting across from them, arguing about what happened, they might not be lying in the way we think of it.
Not in the calculated sense, no. They have genuinely convinced themselves they have nothing to apologize for. Because the hurtful event, or at least the magnitude of the hurt, it never really occurred. Not in their revised memory.
They've edited the script.
They've edited the script. They may have been the perpetrator, but in the new script, they're the misunderstood victim. They were forced to react because you were being unreasonable. And that self-deception allows them to sincerely believe they did nothing wrong. It avoids the catastrophic shame.
That analysis of blame is so key. Blame is the antidote to shame.
It absolutely is. Blame is safer than apology because it pushes the pain outside and it maintains that self-image of virtue. When you argue with them, remember that. You're not debating the facts of a fight you had on Tuesday night. You are threatening the very foundation of their identity.
And they will fight ruthlessly to protect that. So if you're waiting for a sincere apology from someone whose mind is actively built to prevent it, you are just. You're signing up for endless frustration. And this brings us to the practical lessons. What can you actually do to reclaim some control?
We have to look at the refusal to apologize as a control strategy. Because for the non-apologizer, relationships are often not about mutual connection. They are, as you said, a zero-sum game. An apology is submission.
And when they refuse to apologize, they achieve two really powerful goals. First, they force you to constantly question your own reality. Maybe I am too sensitive.
Today is my fault.
Right. And second, they delay emotional closure forever. They keep you agitated, and they shift the entire emotional burden of the conflict right onto your shoulders.
They'll use the silent treatment or deflection until you, the listener, you just finally collapse. You say, fine, forget it, it's not a big deal. And that's when their strategy works. They didn't just avoid responsibility, they successfully trained you to absorb their discomfort for them.
This behavior is so often misinterpreted as strength. Our society confuses firmness with inner fortitude all the time. People who never back down, they're often seen as being really confident.
And we need to make the vital distinction here between true confidence and fragile confidence. True, authentic confidence can tolerate being imperfect. It can handle admitting a mistake without its whole world falling apart. False confidence, that fragile ego, it has to defend an image of perfection at all costs.
So what you're seeing isn't strength.
No. What you are witnessing in their silence is profound fragility. The loudest, most rigid egos are almost always the most brittle.
So knowing all this, what's the practical lesson? How do we stop hitting our heads against that wall?
Well, the hard reality is that you cannot force an apology from someone whose internal architecture is built specifically to defend against it. You have to adjust your expectations. Expecting them to just overhaul their core defensive wiring because you asked nicely is like expecting someone with a broken leg to run a marathon.
It's just not in their capacity.
It's not in their capacity to perform that act of vulnerability.
Which means the key shift has to be in how we respond. We have to stop listening to their words or, the lack of them and start watching their behavior.
Exactly. Because they can't bear the shame of a verbal apology, sometimes they'll try to compensate. They'll use these awkward nonverbal gestures. They might suddenly give you a lavish gift or do you a huge favor or be unusually accommodating in some other part of your life.
But with no explanation.
With no explanation. These are their clumsy attempts to make amends for the action while rigidly preserving their identity as a perfect person.
So the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, is recognizing this limitation and protecting your own peace. The moment you stop needing their verbal apology to validate your experience, that's when you reclaim your power. You validate your own reality for yourself. And that independence is the ultimate win.
And if we zoom out, we have to recognize the terrible hidden cost for the non-apologizer. While they succeed in avoiding that immediate external pain, they pay a dark internal price. Their need to constantly defend this illusion of themselves leads to shallow relationships, to profound emotional isolation, to just constant, unresolved inner conflict.
They're trapped in a state of internal vigilance. They're forever running from the truth of their own imperfection. The final finding from these sources is just so clear. People who never apologize are not strong. They are using an immense amount of energy protecting something that's deeply broken. Their silence isn't confidence. It is deep, deep fear, just expertly disguised as control.
And this raises the final provocative thought for you to consider. The mystery isn't really why they never say sorry to you. The mystery is how long they can successfully run from themselves.
For more hidden truths about human behavior and to keep unpacking the uncomfortable realities of psychology, please subscribe to Unspoken Psychology and hit the bell button.